All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Analyzing the Job Market, Finding the Best New Hires for Your Organization. My name is Holden Andrews, and I will be one of the hosts for today. Our other two speakers are CEO Chris Chmura, and then Director of Data and Strategic Partnerships, Skip Carleton. So first, we want to give everyone just a little bit of an overview of who Chmura is. So what we do is we provide labor market data and analysis, and our main goal is to help our clients make informed decisions that allow their communities to thrive. Chmura was founded in 1998 by Chris Chmura, and there are two offices, one in Richmond, Virginia, and the other in Cleveland, Ohio. We are economists, data scientists, statisticians, and business professionals who really care about helping your community grow. The two things that drive us are client satisfaction and overall success. And excellence, as you'll see here in a minute, is our first priority. So what you're looking at right here are kind of our four pillars. So we have excellence right at the top. That is what we strive for. And then we also look to be thorough, accurate, and useful. These ideals are what guide our organization. They are what drive us and what we aspire to be. So one way we kind of exemplify these values is through our weekly economic update report. We send this report out for free once a week with the most up-to-date national data. And if you would like to join this report, I will put a link in the chat here in a couple minutes. So before I pass things off to Chris, I would like to mention that we will be sending all of the meeting slides and recordings to the attendees either tomorrow or Friday, but we really hope you enjoy. If you have any questions during the presentation and webinar, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. So, Chris?
Thanks, Holden. Let me get started here with analyzing the job market. And as if you've attended these before, I typically will begin with a quick national overview. So we're seeing some encouraging economic trends. Are we going to ever get to herd immunity? It seems like the economy's moving along without us getting there. Some medical analysts saying that with the Delta variant would need to get to 90%. Other medical analysts saying that we're probably, when you consider the people who have had COVID, somewhere around 70% in terms of herd immunity. Then I'll look at the appropriate labor shed when you're looking at expanding your firm or where are your employees coming from. We need to define that area that you pull your employees from, and that's what we economists call the labor shed. So we'll talk about how to do that, and then Skip will take over and talk about finding the best new hires for your organization, both from the corporate side of either a new site or expanding at the current site, as well as from a human resource manager's point of view. So with that, the national overview. And if you've been in our presentation before, you know that around the globe, a recession is defined by 2 quarterly declines in GDP, gross domestic product. But here in the U.S., we've got the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they define the recession when it begins and ends using monthly data. And they use several indicators, and these are 3 of them. And so in gray here, you see the recession. The COVID recession, they declared it started in March and ended in April. So it was only 2 months long, but 2 quarters long because March and April straddled 2 quarters. So it was from first quarter to second quarter. But here you see the 2 months in terms of employment. So when we went into the recession, we lost all the jobs that were created over the prior expansion, and we've been climbing out of that pretty well. The last number that came out was disappointing. Just a little bit over 200,000. But when we look at these numbers, they correlate with when the virus is bad. Here it slowed down as the Delta variant was spiking across some of the southern U.S. states. On the right-hand side, consumption and income. So this is consumers spending on goods and services. And this is very important because consumers make up about 70% of GDP. So here, when we went into COVID, we were told to stay at home. People who could not work remotely or could not work without being socially distanced. We're told to stay at home, so you saw a great drop-off in consumption. But on the other hand, we saw a great increase in income. With the CARES Act at first, we had stimulus money, checks going to households. The unemployment insurance benefits were much larger. And then we continued to see another stimulus. And then here, again, a third, as you see income spiking. And now income is more back to normal, somewhere around 3-4% change from a year ago. But during this period where consumers weren't going out and spending, they were saving a good bit of that money. So then when we got to the point where we could go out and spend more safely, you saw a huge spike in spending activity, up 25% from a year ago. It's down now, much lower, again, in part due to the Delta variant, causing some people to be concerned and staying at home. Industrial production is another indicator that the NBER looks at to define a recession. And here you can see the percent change from a year ago, huge drop off during recession, and then the huge rebound, and then somewhat slowing here. Still a strong growth rate of about 7%. Some of the semiconductor chip issues, supply chain problems are causing the slowdown here. But at this point, we're expecting the economy to remain strong over the next rest of the year as well as 2022. So here you see the Great Recession, which was the worst recession we had seen since the Great Depression. And here it was a long recession, and it was deep, but not nearly as deep as what we saw during the COVID recession. But also we had the strong rebound. And now in red here, you're seeing our forecast for the third quarter declining from the second quarter, which was up around 6%, in part, again, because the Delta variant is causing some people to cut back some of their vacations or business trips, spending in general. But then you see it back up to 5%, and over the year, up around 3 to 5%. As a benchmark, anything greater than 2% is considered very strong growth. So as we look forward, we expect at least GDP to be growing at a very strong rate for the next year and a half, then getting down to something more normal when we get to 2023. Now, many of you in HR or corporate are seeing a very atypical market in terms of the labor market. That is, typically coming out of a recession, the unemployment rate does not drop as much. We don't see wages rising like wages have been rising recently, and that's because firms are having to try to attract people to come back from home and to work in the restaurants and other places. So you see, again, the unemployment rate dropping rapidly, and then on the right-hand side, we're looking at the participation rate. Each of these gray shaded areas are recessions. We go all the way back to before 1950. And so notice in the 1970s and 80s, when the baby boomers were coming into the labor market and when more women were working in the labor market, we saw the participation rate continue to rise, getting to around a peak of 67%. And then it's been coming down since then, in part due to some retirements. But then you see it just dropped off a cliff when we went into the COVID recession, and then it's come back up, but not nearly to the levels we saw pre-COVID. So what's causing participation rates to be so low? We've got some early retirements, some people who don't want to go back because of COVID, fear of contracting the virus, even people who are not retiring. And then we've had some people who have stayed at home to help their children who are schooling online. The additional federal unemployment insurance helped. The additional federal unemployment insurance of about $300 ended as of Labor Day. And also we see kids going back to school, so that may help the participation rate increase. So here we are in this economy where people are starting to go back to work. They're starting to consume more. And so businesses are trying to hire more people. But on top of that, people are quitting at a more rapid rate than we've ever seen over the 20 years that we've had this data that's called the JOLTS data, job openings and turnovers. Again, gray shaded areas are recessions. When we go into a recession, this is the percentage of people quitting as a percent of total employment. And when we go into a recession, it drops off. You don't quit your job when there's so much uncertainty, when the unemployment rate is high. We saw the same thing during COVID, but coming out of COVID, we saw a lot of people starting to go and look for new jobs. And in April, we hit a record of 3.992 million Americans quitting, 2.8% of the employment. And then it fell a bit, but in July back up to 2.7% or 3.97 million people. So not only are we have a double whammy here. Not only are you seeing an increase in demand for your goods and services as a business, but you're also seeing more employees that are quitting and looking at alternative jobs. That is having an impact on this being a very tight labor market. So one of the things that people have talked about or asked a lot about is what percentage of people are working from home and will continue to. Of course, the will continue to is hotly debated now, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics added a question to their household survey when COVID started. And the question was, how many people teleworked or worked from home in the past 4 weeks due to COVID? So notice at a high back in July of 2020, it was 26%. It dropped off, and then the percentage of people working from home increased around the holidays when we saw a spike in the virus. And then it's been dropping off, got to a low of 13.2% in July. And then it came up in August just a little bit, probably due to the fact that Delta has increased. So in our Jobs EQ, we have job posts. We deduplicate. We look at over 40,000 sites on a daily basis. And here we ask the question, well, for the top 10 occupations, we look to see which occupations can work remotely. So we looked at it pre-COVID, how many of these occupations could work remotely, and then the latest data in terms of a quarter that we have. And these are the top 10 occupations where the employers are allowing to work from home. But notice the 2-year growth. So huge increases. Software developers, the ads are up over 500%, 400% for customer service reps, and on down the line. You can see huge jumps in the number of people who are able to work from home. And Skip's going to talk about how that's a benefit right now. So if you allow that benefit, that would enable you, if you advertise it, it might enable you to get more workers. But now I'm looking at the percent of all ads that say you can work remote in the latest quarter. So even though we've seen a huge jump in the number of software developers that can work remotely, according to the firms that are advertising right now, that's only 27% of all software developers. And if you look, some of these numbers are fairly small. 17% of management analysts, only 15% of computer use support specialists can work from home. The only one that is really big is insurance sales at agents. Almost 50% of all ads there allow the insurance sales agent to work from home. So one other topic that I'm going to hit on real quickly before we go to Skip is identifying the appropriate labor shed. So this is, where are you drawing your workers from? And right now we have block level data, and that's better. I'll show you how that's better than zip code level data. And it's important to not just look at a radius, but look at a drive time so that you can account for, say, mountains or where the interstate highways are or lakes or whatever. So how do you identify a block? Well, a block literally in some towns, here we're in New York City, is a city block. So we have data down to this block level. And in some areas, say out west, like here we're looking around Reno, I believe, Nevada. And here you see a block that's not a block like a city block, but larger than that. But the thing is that a zicta is like a zip code, but we use zictas because they don't change over time like zip codes do. And so a zicta can be one block, or one block can be equal to a zicta, but typically you have one or more blocks that make up a zicta. So this block level is more precise. So when we're looking at things like, say, for example, if you wanted to look at a city council district or a congressional district, sometimes they cross over zip codes. And so for that, you really need to go down to the block level. So here you see several blocks making up this economic development zone. So that would be one reason why you might want to look at that. But let me give you an example. If you're expanding, and here I'm looking at 3 counties. It's an MSA. It's the Greensboro MSA in North Carolina. And let's say we're going to put our plant at this particular spot, and maybe we're a paint coatings firm hiring about 350 people or so. So if I was using a radius, a 400-mile, or I'm sorry, a radius, this is the labor shed that I would be defining as the radius, as opposed to these 3 counties here in this rectangle are showing me the MSA. So the MSA probably understates your workforce, the radius overstates it, but the drive time gives you exactly, following the interstate, you can see how to make up your labor force. And that does make quite a difference. If we were looking again at a chemical plant, you're going to need, the top occupation is likely to be mixing blending machine setters. The MSA, using that definition, would tell you you're going to have 656 mixing blending machine setters available for you, which sounds pretty good. The 45-mile radius says you're going to have 1,500, which is most likely overstating the amount that you're going to have. And the 45-minute drive time, the one that we would say is the most precise, would give you an estimate of 1,022 mixing blending machine setters. So it's very important, again, to consider what your labor shed is, and to use a drive time as well as as well as block level data. Just one more example on how important block level data are. Here we're looking at a 45 minutes from downtown Cactus Forest, Arizona. And if you were to use block-based data, which is what we're showing here, you'd find the labor force is 176,000 people. But if we were using Zikta, your labor force would increase by 80%. Again, this is overestimating the people that might come to your firm. It would be 317,000. And then if you were to use counties, 2.7 million. So again, very important to, when you're considering your labor force, to get accurate data so that when you do expand, or when you do look to employ more people, that you will find them. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Skip.
And thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And just to confirm that, Holden, you can hear me correctly? Correct?
Yes, we can.
All right. Excellent. Just making sure. I appreciate everybody's time today, and I'm going to expand on succeeding in a tight labor market through the lens of HR and corporate, because in this current labor environment, tight labor supply, it's even more important for expanding firms to understand exactly what the skills of a region's workforce are, so we can drill down into that talent pool or that labor supply. And as Chris had mentioned, you can actually see on this particular slide the difference in the granularity between zip code level data and block level data on our left, and the information that's being brought in to that area. And so when we're able to drill down and look at that and just pull up, some demographics based off of Indianapolis itself, and being able to parlay that with some drive time information, and just looking at kind of broader demographic trends from the established population within the block level data set, and looking at versus the entire population of Indiana, looking at some labor force participation rates as well as transportation or mean travel time. And it's going to be interesting to keep in mind from a mean travel time standpoint, my apologies there, of 25 minutes. And so right now we're at a 45-minute drive time. 25 minutes is the average, or the mean time travel wise. And then looking at unemployment within this region versus the US. And of course, from an education standpoint, what we're able to define there. So kind of broadly speaking, we're going to narrow down from that region and the demographics itself, and jump into an occupation snapshot if we were looking for general laborers or freight and stock material movers, whether that's from an industrial standpoint of looking for a freight stock or a general laborer. We can see average workers in the occupation and drill down into that versus all occupations in the area versus Illinois and online, as well as the wages and labor for freight versus total or all occupations. And so we're able to see that, in the green, we have our labor and freights from an experience level, looking at those wages or those laborers and their experience level versus an entry level. And then, of course, looking at the mean itself, and rarely do you hire on the mean, so it gives some variability when it comes to occupation wages. When we can come down and look at the median or different percentiles of where they would lie from an experience standpoint, and that goes back to Chris's comment around this being a very tight labor market and wages affecting the attraction of people that you're drawing, as well as looking at some of that cost of living information that we have. So we're able to gather a lot of information around a particular occupation. Moving to another example, we kind of look at a laborer versus a chemist. Same thing, active, total, all occupations, the wages for that information. Chemist obviously going to be a little bit higher based off their education level from an experience standpoint, as well as the entry level. So we can notice about that $35,000 gap in the cost from entry to experience salaries. But of course, the mean, and once again, rarely looking off the mean, we can then break that down as well, looking at some of those occupation wages and of course the cost of living as well. And when we can do that, thinking of one end of the spectrum of a laborer and then of course a chemist, but looking for a marketing specialist or a market research analyst, the same thing, we can gather all this individual data of what we're looking at from online job ads, employers in the area, and of course the wages as well. And so we've started with this broad kind of swath of information from Chris, coming down and getting more granular within to Indianapolis, and then some individual positions as well. And now I'm going to jump into Jobs EQ and show you how to do that. And so moving forward from the slide deck into the actual data that we have ourselves, we're able to create these drive times and custom areas and radiuses or block level, county level, all of that within Jobs EQ, and actually create a new region. And if you're a customer of Jobs EQ, obviously, and able to do this, you can share that region with other individuals within your company. So there's no need to go in and reinvent the wheel. And so this was just an example of how we can come in and create these based off of drawing or a radius. In this specific example, parlaying our block level data and our drive time into a specific area. I happen to have my location set to Richmond, so that's where it defaults to. We do have a number of tools, and I couldn't help but notice in the chat that some of you guys were asking about demographics and labor force participation, and ironically enough, that's where I was going to start today, because that's kind of where we started in the slide deck. And just from a mental standpoint, I'm going to go back up the ladder. So if Chris brought us down and I continue to take us down in granularity down the steps of the ladder, kind of getting to the bottom of that, and then I'm going to work my way back up into, at the top of that would be overall broad corporate site selection. But just to give everybody a little bit of insight, I've come over and uploaded our custom drive times, 45 minutes at the zip code level and then block level as well. We can come in, get a preview of that information and look at that specific region and say, what are we really looking at? What are we really, the underlying data that we're pulling, and going to be able to show and actually compare to each other of the sizes. And so in looking at the ZICTA level data in Illinois and within Indianapolis, and if we look at that compared to just doing a search of the MSA itself, which is just drawn on it, but as we come down, going back to what Chris said around the population size for the ZIPTA level, 2.1 million, at the block level, getting more granular, more detailed at 1.8, we can come down, and when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we can look within the area. If this was the area we were searching, now keep in mind, block level data, 45-minute drive time is the column we want to be in. As we come down, we can also look at that population around male to female. We can look at median age ranges as well. and of course, race and ethnicity. We can also come in, and map that information simply by clicking on the button and then being able to pull us up and taking us into another segments where we can map that. We can put different layers on as well. We can then change the information and put other variables on top of it. So we get very, very granular. And I know this is kind of a broad presentation, but if you're interested in a detailed presentation and you're a client of ours, you can contact your account manager. But here we're looking at some demographics based on race and the percentages. So if we were going to target a specific area for job ads, if we were trying to diversify our workforce and being more inclusive in our workforce, and we were focused within Indianapolis, here we could come in and find some of those specific areas that we might want to be able to target for that. And so taking a step back over into our demographics again, all the demographics we have, looking at labor force participation rates. Also, we can go in and look at the data around information within the tool itself that's going to take us to unemployment. So we can go into an area and then find where the unemployment may be a little bit higher and try to target those areas. And so as I move forward, Holden, I wanted to stop maybe for a second and see if we had any questions, so far that could be addressed.
The only thing I'm seeing, Chris or Skip, could you zoom in just a tiny bit? We've got a couple comments just asking you to zoom in a little bit. I think that'd be helpful.
My apologies. I was on one of my larger screens. Maybe we'll start there. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, I think that's better. At least it is on my end.
All right. You guys definitely let Holden know if you can't see, if I need to zoom in a little bit more. And so I'll go back to that drive time and then just Indiana. And for the sake of confusion, I'll leave out the ZICTA level information. And so when we pull this in, going back to our demographics and the breakdown of what we can actually see here within this 45-minute drive time, race, ethnicity as well, and of course, labor force participation rates of those over 16 years old and what we're able to find within this area. And even going back to like the Indianapolis MSA, I think that labor force participation rate, because how they draw that up, was only 67%. So we're able to glean and gather some of this information, as well as look at the education value or the education that the demographics provide within the areas we've decided to search. And then, of course, having the ability to go in and look at unemployment, household income, some regional stats. Those are going to help define some of the unions in the area as well. And so to pivot over from our demographics tool, where now we can go in and look at the labor force participation in a specific area, we can go back into our RTI tool. And so that's our real-time intelligence job postings tool. And so as we've been speaking with prospects and clients that specialize in HR or have HR departments or are just looking to expedite the hiring of new people, they've been telling us that it's very important that you need to start, or if you're going to start or state a higher than normal wage or salary for the person you're trying to attract or the position you're trying to attract for, you need to state those wages in your job ads, as well as any type of benefits. And kind of going back to what Chris mentioned, working from home or being remote these days is a big benefit that people are looking for. So we can come in, take a look at that information, and then add specific filters as well. And so this is how we can sort by occupation, certifications, hard skills or soft skills. And so jumping into the Indianapolis area, we can see over the past 3 months, there have been 120 job ads placed in total. And so as we work our way down from that, some of the things that we could look for would be to include those wages. And so if we're coming in and looking for a retail salesperson and you're trying to hire in the area, of course, looking at that median wage, if you're advertising higher rates than that, pay rates than that, you need to make that known within the advertisement, as well as, what other benefits may be available. And from a benefits standpoint, working remotely, if we can pull that information in, and then that will also narrow down what we're looking for. And of course, wage wise, we can go from annual to hourly, and lining back up with Chris's part of the presentation, customer service representatives, I think, were second on the list under software developers from a remote benefits standpoint. And so that's really what allows us to jump in and look for information like this, as well as the number of ads that are out there, those median wages, and then being able to pull those in and actually see where they're coming from. This also gives us a lot of insight into what competitors are in the space. And so when we can go in and look at employers here momentarily, we can bring that back and go in and look at the employers and see who is hiring, whether it is a Amazon that you're competing with, or a hospital for a particular role, or if you're just in general wanting to search by skills such as a software developer who incentivized, or the benefits he sees are being able to work remotely, but you need someone that can pull in JavaScript as well. And so we can then search by that skill set and pull that information up in JobsEQ in our RTI tool independently. So I'll jump back in. I apologize. I was having some internet connectivity issues here this morning, and being able to pull some of this data in. And I see questions in the side, Barry, you just asked, is the census data 2020? We're going to be able to get those questions answered for you. And probably in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to wrap up and then be able to take questions in and be able to address some of those for you. And so when we look at our RTI tool and get back into JobsEQ itself, once again, my apologies.
Skip, since you're having some connectivity issues, let me go. There's one question that someone asked, and let me go ahead and answer that one, and then you can, while you get your internet reloaded there. So we had a question about young adults, and specifically, let me find that question again. Young adults, whether they're entering the labor force later in life. And actually, this is a great time for young adults. You saw that the participation rate is low. So the unemployment rate for teenagers actually is lower than it typically is during a recession or coming out of a recession, because there are so many job openings right now. And then that kind of links with something that someone else asked about, whether we're able to see any data during this COVID period with regard to race and gender. And yes, we are starting to get to see some of the early numbers coming out. And to do that, we look at the American Community Survey as well as the Current Population Survey. And specifically, we've done work in several areas, but Jobs First New York City does a great job in helping the young trying to find jobs. And their information is, well, we did a report for them, and it's in the public domain. If you went to jobsfirstnyc.org, you can see that report where we started to look at the pandemic's effect on young adults. And they've, like I said, done a great job of helping young adults that are out of school specifically and out of work find jobs. And over the past 5 years, that the number of people out of school, out of youth in New York City, out of school, out of work in New York City has been declining, but it popped up, no surprise, with this recession. So thanks for giving me a minute to answer that question, and back to you, Skip.
No, not a problem. And I'm going to pick up or kind of jump up where we left off in regards to looking for specific types of skills and being able to search by whether it's certifications or hard skills or soft skills. And so if we're looking for something individually from a JavaScript standpoint or some other type of information in this particular section, we can then come in and see what types of jobs are being offered from a compensation standpoint, as well as load in those wages so you can see from the competitive landscape of what other talent is being offered and maybe where you need to be or how you can sweeten the offer to do that. But also, looking at the employers in the area, we'll notice we have a couple hospitals within the area, healthcare that aren't advertising, wages like that. And of course, this is just the top 10, but also a good thing to be able to search and kind of sort for as well when we look at a particular occupation. If we're coming in to look at someone that's going to be doing some market research for us or analysis or marketing specialist in order to drive that information, now we can see where those are exactly from a median range standpoint, and then of course those total ads. And so as we're searching for these candidates, try to find certain candidates or put a benefits package together, we could then jump in, take a look at some of that information that is around our market research or market specialist position, and then go in and look at the individual occupation profile for that. And or if we can't source for this specific individual, if HR is searching for other candidates to fill this role that might not have the exact same job title now, we can then pivot over to our willing and able tool and find other individuals that are actually going to fit that role or have the same set of skills that are going to be able to come over. And of course, we could do by willing able or attribution gap, skills gap, and then look at projected gaps or total demand. But to kind of make it brief, since this is a broader demonstration of the tool, we can jump in and then see who's willing, who's able to pivot or shift, if you will, into that role of a specific market research analyst. And from an HR standpoint, you might go and look and try to find some of these other individuals that will fill this role, as well as if we were building a plant or a factory somewhere and we needed mixing or blender positions, blending machine setters, like we had alluded to in the demonstration itself earlier, we can now find roles that were parallel with that who are actually willing and able. And so if we looked at, wares and measures or fiberglass and then paper goods machine setters, going back to that mixing standpoint, this is how we can find and develop that talent pool if we didn't necessarily have all the labor in an area that we were specifically looking for. And so in order to help define that more and kind of define that further, we've moved around a little bit today from our demographic profile information. We can dig into occupation characteristics as well, which is going to have some of that demographic data and information, as well as our RTI, our jobs posting information that we pivoted from, a brief look at some of our occupation snapshot, and of course willing and able tools. But also if we look at job and talent locator as we're moving back up the ladder from a granularity standpoint, block level, moving kind of further up the rungs, we can then come in and search for, especially in a remote environment, we can come in and search for software developers in a specific area. So if you had an office in Nashville or Birmingham or Michigan, you could come in and say, if this is going to be a remote position, where should I potentially go in and put job ads up from a location standpoint, and able to find a person or a candidate to fill this particular role. And when we look at this will give us a list across the country, kind of based on region, but also keeping in mind that the migration that has occurred, moving out of cities like New York into other areas, is facilitated by the remote work ability now. And so we can see what region we might want to target for software developers, going in from total employment average annual wages, online job ads as well. That'll take us back to our RTI tool, the unemployment rate, the cost of living, and then coming down and looking at other areas that may align either with a range that you're looking for. If you were trying to recruit out of Kansas City and knew you had a higher salary than that and could attract a very high caliber talent or individual to come into your office, being able to work remote, and you're offering $110,000, obviously maybe want to recruit in the Kansas City area versus that $110,000 in the Colorado area if you have that scalability to actually come in and do some more remote work. And so that's also the way that we're using Jobs EQ and tying that together, as you saw in the presentation itself. And to get back to that highest bit of corporate relocation and expansion, not just looking at it through the lens or segment departmentally of HR, human resources, from an entire corporate standpoint, if we were looking to locate or relocate, expand, we could then come in and pick whatever type of manufacturing we were doing based off of industry codes, looking at it from that MSA standpoint right now. Expansion, contraction, we'll pull this up and be able to see that, or if the Indianapolis MSA kind of fits the category for this. And here, I'm going to start in this far right-hand column. Chmura also has a consulting division. It's been in business for 22 years, obviously founded by Dr. Chris Chmura. But on the consulting side of the house, we have learned that site selectors like to see at least 50 openings per candidate. And so they're trying to hire 26 new packing and filling machine operators, and there are 141 potential candidates per opening. And so all of this looks good from the initial scan, but then we could also come back and look at employment parallels. So it would allow us, just like that willing and able tool, what categories or what types of occupations will align with the packing and filling machine operators. And so we come down looking for those and trying to fill these particular positions to build out this manufacturing plant or to build out a commercial bank expansion. It really doesn't matter looking at this tool, not just from a static standpoint, but it allows and pulls in different dynamics that we bring in, especially looking within the area, to be able to find this and fill certain positions. And so if we were to look at accountants and come in and see, how do we figure out where accountants were being educated if we want to recruit right out of college? We're looking to fill the budget category of entry-level accountants because we know, looking at our workforce plan, we have the ability to actually know that we have an older person that's an accountant or an experienced person or a well-experienced, but we need an entry-level candidate to do that. We can then come in and pull this information and actually see where they have gone to college, what awards were provided, and more importantly, kind of where those colleges were. So looking at the Indianapolis MSA for accounting, looking at Purdue, Global, Indiana University, and of course the University of Indianapolis, and what they've given 4-year degrees, postgraduate awards. So really gives us insight into the education behind the labor force and the labor pool, as well as you're trying to attract that new talent and or building a relationship with the university's alumni department, and that way you could match up through the university who you were looking to hire with candidates more experienced in the field. And so I'm going to pause momentarily and we'll open this up for questions. But also, before I do, the small caveat of all of the data you've seen today is available via API or data feed. So if you didn't want to access Jobs EQ directly through the SaaS-based platform, you can speak to us in regards to an API and get this granular data that's you or any internal dashboards that your HR team is using or your corporate site selection team is using. If you're a current client, you can contact your account manager for a custom training like this that we did today. And so, Holden, with that, I'm going to keep sharing my screen, but I'll go back to mute and let you jump in from here.
Actually, real quick, Skip, we have a question in the chat about someone has had trouble finding job titles in data analytics. So could you real quick kind of take us to where we can see those job titles?
From an occupations standpoint or from an RTI?
I would go to RTI, I think, Skip. And while you're going there, there was a question about whether we have 2020 census data in Jobs EQ yet, and the answer is no, but we are working through it right now. So it's right now in being worked on.
So we can approach. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to jump back in, but we can approach the job titles or the occupation titles either from RTI or through our occupation snapshot that we've come into. And so if we look total all occupations and just start typing for what we're looking for, like that marketing manager, whatever it may be. But in order to find all of them, if you simply click on the magnifying glass icon, we can come down and then it's going to break it out by those broad categories, because from an occupation standpoint, we can start at the 2-digit level or go all the way into the 6-digit SOC codes and really be able to break those out and see that chief executive officer is this. We can get more granular into general operations as well. And so that's where we can find those occupation titles specifically.
Yeah, so Skip, this one is particular. This person has had a hard time finding data analytics. So if you go back to RTI and then maybe under job titles, put in data analytics with quotations around it, I think that would help show this person how to find that.
No, not a problem. And so go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, while you're pulling that up, someone asked the question about remote work. If there was a way to just pull open all of the remote work, and the way to do that would be to do a keyword search. So at the very bottom, again, put quotations around remote work, and you can capture it that way.
And so we could type in within the filter itself, data analytics amongst the occupation when we add that filter and pull the data in that way. Or as Chris had mentioned, looking for a keyword filter around data analytics. And then that will provide that search and being able to populate the information that way. In the same regards, how I searched for remote work earlier, I didn't use the parentheses around it, but you can use the parentheses as well. And then being able to find, those occupations that have that skill set around, data analytics, and or if it was a particular rule itself or role itself that we were looking for that didn't match up SOC code wise, we can search anything and almost everything through this keyword search. And then we can see where either the skills or the occupation itself pops in.
Yeah, thanks, Skip. And then Rory also gave a good example with cybersecurity is another one of those where it's not yet an occupation identified by BLS, but if you put in cybersecurity and if you want to try that, then you can see which occupations are related to it. So again, quotations around cybersecurity, and then we'll go up to the occupations, and you could see the 3 occupations. Well, actually, your keyword filter is information. So cybersecurity, and take analysts out.
My apologies. I copied
That's
and
okay.
pasted straight from the chat. So sorry about that, everybody.
That's okay. And so now you're seeing the occupations that are related to cyber. So you may want to decide to create your own group, call it cybersecurity, but click over on the left-hand side next to the SOC codes. You may want to just pick the first 3. So click on the box next to those first 3, and then you can create a group, call it whatever you want, cyber occupations or whatever, and then you could save it and look at it going forward.
And then, of course, share with your team as well so they could pull this back up. And so then we can apply that custom occupation group into our other analytics and pull that up the same way we could pull up Indianapolis 45-minute drive time at block level. We can pull up cybersecurity ocs within the occupation snapshot, wages, awards, all this other information. And so that's how we could do that. And or right now, if we just wanted to add those to the filters, because these were our top 3 jobs, if we hit them add to filter, it'll push them over here to the right hand side. And now we're just gleaning the information based off of those 3 roles.
Thanks, Skip. We had another question from Andrew wanting to know if you could do a cluster such as distribution and e-commerce in the what if report. And yes, you can. So you can create your own custom clusters or use clusters to look at the occupations that would be used and whether you have enough in your region. I think that is all the questions. Did we miss any, Holden?
I haven't seen any other questions come through, so I believe we've gotten them all.
Okay, well, we'll wait another minute or so for the questions. Thank you all for attending, and please feel free to send in ideas of what you would like to have us do the webinars on in the future. And as we've said before, we'll continue to do these as long as you find them to be useful. We really appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate even so those that are not clients as well as those that are, and we're happy to provide this information. So with that, thank you all again, and feel free to contact your account manager or me or Skip if you have questions, and Holton will be sending this out later today or tomorrow.
Yes, I will. Thanks, everyone.